For sure.
Okay, you're good.
Monday 35.
What?
Looks like it's really cold today.
Hey, we're the Woodrow Wilson group for the Progressive era. Woodrow Wilson is the son of a pastor, and because of this, he traveled all around the South during the Civil War and got to witness firsthand all of the effects of it. After he grew up, he studied law at the University of Virginia and got his PhD at Johns Hopkins University. Then after he graduated college, his thesis about congressional government was published. And then he moved on to become Princeton University's 13th president. And when he was at Princeton, he made huge reforms and is known as one of their best ever presidents. He then decided to run for New Jersey governor and then won the election in 1912. And a lot of the reasons he won those elections was due to his excellent orator skills, and which proved him better than the other candidates when he was running during the races. The election in 1912 had 4 candidates, and Wilson had the advantage because the vote was split. During the Republican vote was split, so that he got the advantage. He ran on the platform of New Freedom, and he promoted which promoted competition between businesses and minimal federal inclusion. That's what we're looking for. Oh, sorry. And then he ran around Roosevelt, which ran against New Nationalism, and their opposing viewpoints was constantly brought up during different debates and different things that they did during the election. And Wilson received 435 electoral votes out of 40 states, so he clearly was the winning elector.
Wilson based his election of 1912 on New Freedom. There were promises he made to voters while he ran for president, like his reforms for banking, tariffs, and trusts. He called it the triple wall of privilege. For his tariff reforms, what he really wanted to do was to lower all the tariffs. So he signed the Underwood-Simmons Act. It lowered tariff rates for the first time since the American Civil War. It stopped American businesses from taking advantage and making their prices higher than necessary because prices from the old tariffs were higher. He argued that the high tariffs created monopolies and hurt customers. For his banking reform, he wanted to erase the conflict between Democrats and Republicans over banking issues. And Republicans promoted private banks, and Democrats support the government-owned central banks that commit paper money. So the Federal Reserve Act was created to make both sides content, and the act helped make the U.S. currency more reliable.
The Federal Reserve Act. This act was created on December 23rd, 1913. It was actually a follow-up to the Aldrich-Vreeland Act, hard to pronounce. And what it did was it created a national currency. We already had a national currency, but it established a new one. The one we actually currently call the U.S. dollar. It was called the Federal Reserve Note. I believe the name was changed in about 1935. The act was made to regulate the financial crisis that citizens were going through. By establishing a national currency, you can now go to any bank in the country or in any state and use the same currency, whereas generally the individual states would have their own currency where you could only use that at certain banks. And there were 12 national banks created. If you can sort of see in this picture, you can see which areas had a national bank in their I guess certain area, sort of New England. You can see over here in the west and the southeast. Also, these national banks were required to join the Federal Reserve System. This meant that they were they had to work with the government, and that it was required that they have the same national currency. And now the government could regulate inflation, although it was fraudulently formed. This act was formed by wealthy bankers for their own benefit, but it ended up helping not only them but also just American citizens. business regulation. Wilson was considered pretty progressive at the time, and he passed two pretty vital acts. One of them, obviously, the Federal Reserve Act, and the other was known as the Clayton Antitrust Act. What the Clayton Antitrust Act did, I'll describe in the next slide, but basically it was a follow-up to the Schulman Antitrust Act. He wanted to establish a national banking system, and he wanted to protect citizens from inflation. He was sort of running on the basis that he wanted to help the American public. He was not there to help big business. Also, he made some other acts, such as the Federal Farm and Loan Act, the Keating-Owen Child Labor Act, the Working Men's Compensation Act, and the Adamson Act of 1916. All these acts had to do with either regulating business or protecting labor unions. Also, these acts helped them to gain, such as an 8-hour workday. That was the whole idea, that he advocated for labor unions, and the Clayton Antitrust actually fed into that. It was enacted on October 15th, 1914. The Clayton Antitrust Act sort of strengthened the Sherman Antitrust Act, and it was much more specific so that it could directly target monopolies and trusts, because the Sherman Antitrust was a little too vague, and so when it was sort of when they tried to use it in the Supreme Court, it wasn't very effective, and it actually sort of backfired a little bit in that they could, in that big corporations could now use it to justify fighting against labor unions. Wilson thinks that the Antitrust Act needed to be, and he sought to end monopolies and cartels. He was one of the first presidents to do this, and he worked hard at entering the corporations that he specifically felt were bad for the economy, that were bad for the people. It addresses price discrimination, exclusion deals, labor union organizations, and mergers. The whole idea here is price discrimination and exclusive deals are supposed to help big corporations to take down smaller businesses. Protecting labor union organization, that's the whole idea behind the American public getting a better work life, better work self. And the act led to the demise of many monopolies taking over corporate America in the early to mid-1900s.
So, in conclusion, Wilson's known as a president that made huge reforms, and many of which are still used today and still referenced today, and he's definitely won't be a forgotten president and has left his legacy. He ran on the platform of New Freedom, and that carried out into his presidency. He did most of what he claimed he would do. He tried to break up monopolies. He made the Federal Reserve Act, and the Federal Reserve Act, obviously we still have the American dollar today, and it's used in every single state, and we still have many of the banks that were created. So overall, his legacy is we still reference things that he does today.
So that was, yeah, just